Returning to what's been one of our top stories for the last few days, and that's the murder of Hannah Clark and her 3 children in a car fire started by her estranged husband. It's caused absolute outrage in the community, but also analysis of exactly how the media covers domestic violence issues. Joining us now is Jane Gilmore, author of Fixed It, a book that delves into the media's portrayal of domestic violence. Jane, thank you for your time. What have been the concerning headlines for you in this coverage of this horrific murder out of Brisbane?
Honestly, I don't think I could remember them all. There have been so many that were just unbelievably bad. I think one of the ones that really stood out was ex-footy star dies in burning car, showered kids with love. So the only death that made it to the headline was his. There was no implication. Like, it sounds like the kids are fine. He was a lovely dad who showered them with love, and sadly he's died in a car accident. That's what you get from that headline, which, as we now know, was nothing like what happened. And when that article came out, they also knew that, and the information in the article actually said that. But the headline was this. It was staggering, and I've been doing this for 5 years constantly. I didn't think it was possible for me to still be shocked. It turns out that I was wrong about that.
One of the hard things in the coverage is he was portraying himself as a loving father, and he was portraying himself as devoted in social media posts to family and friends. We now know that was a front for what was persistently abusive behaviour. Is it not part of the story, though, to include that?
Yes, it's definitely part of the story, but the part of the story about including that is to say that this is so very, very common in abusive people, that this is the part of the pattern of abuse. This is how they keep their victims under control, is they portray themselves to everybody else as the kind, caring, loving, sensible one, and far too often they portray their victims to their friends, to their family, to the police, to anybody who will listen, as the crazy person, as the vindictive one, as the one that's unreliable, as the one that lies all the time. This is part of how people who are abusive keep their victims under control. So yes, it's absolutely relevant to say that he portrayed himself that way, but I didn't see any reporting at all that put that in the context of what any expert will tell you about domestic abuse. And that was a lot of the problem with the reporting that I saw, that there was no context at all.
So the headlines you mentioned and some of the reporting, it's obviously galling for the family. The reason it matters beyond that is because presumably you've got this issue of domestic violence, and you've got this issue of, you know, people needing to be called out and recognising this early. If you have a situation where people's takeout is, well, something's gone terribly wrong, but didn't that bloke love his kids? Well, that's part of the problem, presumably.
Look, the problems go far beyond just the fact that it causes social media outrage. I mean, I'm glad that it does, but the sort of things we're talking about, I wrote about this morning, was an interview I did with a survivor last night who is absolutely terrified because her abusive ex sent her a copy of one of those terrible articles valorising the man who killed Hannah and her children as a victim. He wants to be the next one who does that. He thinks he will get that coverage. Now, I don't think he will. The thing that we wrote about it was actually the Daily Telly, not one that you would really expect, but their front page saying, "You low mongrel." That's the sort of coverage that you will get if you do something like this. But it's really, really dangerous. There are women all over the country right now who are terrified because of this. There are men all over the country now watching this and thinking, oh, this is what you do. This is a normal reaction. This is an understandable reaction. Now, it's incomprehensible to most of us to burn your own children alive. To even say that is hard to get the words out. But the problem I think that we really need to concentrate on when we as journalists are reporting these kind of stories is understanding not just the women who are listening to this, but the men who are listening to it. Now, there seems to be this thing with journalists and with people who think of themselves as men's rights activists that to defend him is to defend men. And I find that bizarre. If I was a man, if I was a father, if I was a loving father, I would be outraged at having the word loving father applied to somebody who would burn his children alive. A loving father reads his kids stories at night. He plays with his kids and loves his kids and comforts them when they're sad and protects them when they're in danger. He does not kill them. So you can't use the same words to describe a father who actually loves his kids as you use to describe a man who burns his children alive and burns their mother alive. That's not a loving father. And that should never be the way we talk about loving fathers. And this is not defending men to say this. In fact, quite the opposite. So I find the reporting on this really troubling, and I think there's a lot of different reasons for it. Part of it, I think, is this fake balance thing that, oh, we can't say that this was domestic violence. We can't say that he was a man doing that because the MRAs and the feminists will start fighting over it. Now, this one, I don't think they will. Who is actually going to fight to defend a man who did this? Clearly, somebody who does has got a very twisted perspective on the world.
Absolutely. If we look at, you mentioned there before about the Daily Telegraph front page, the Courier, given that it is the paper of the state where this happened, has had two quite powerful front pages. You can see there that there are no excuses one, that was from today. And yesterday also, the day after the incident, they posted what is the 3 children and the mother on the front page with no reference to the father. That's really important, isn't it, in these instances, to not focus on him and what he did, but to look at the victims?
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, there's so many things that are important about this, but centring the victims and their lives, making the fact that they had lives, that they mattered, the fact that those lives have been violated and taken away is actually the thing that's important here. What happens when you centre the perpetrator is you humanise him, you make him sympathetic, and I've seen articles where we hear all about him, we know what he did, we know what his sporting activities were, we know what he was like, we know what his Facebook posts were, but the woman that he killed and the children that he killed barely even get a mention. They're bit players in the story where he's the hero and the victim. And the twist that this gives us, because our job as journalists is to inform the public. If we're not informing them properly, if we're not telling them what the story actually is, we are failing at our job, at our purpose, and we can do better.
Can I just ask you that the comments from the Queensland police officer yesterday giving this news conference, now at one stage he spoke about whether or not there might be people coming forward with evidence that, and he used the word driven, that the man was driven to do this. He later on seemed to clarify that he was not suggesting that was the case, but did say that, you know, if this sort of evidence and people are claiming it was there, they come forward, and this can help with coronial inquiries and reform down the track. Was there a point to be made there? Is that fair enough? If you're talking about what's the trigger, can we avoid these triggers? You know, it might mean police are sent out after something's served and they wait for a couple of hours if that was the trigger for when something was served on the man. Or were these comments just poor regardless?
Well, I think in this case they were poor regardless, and I think what I've seen come out since then is that the Chief Commissioner of Queensland Police has come out and said it was poor wording. That's one way of putting it. Certainly anything that blames the victim for the choices made by a violent man is absolutely wrong. There are no excuses for it. It's maybe, I think what he was trying very badly to say is some people think this might have been a cause, and if you have actual information about this, please come forward. But also, as I understand it, there were no family court matters involved here. So this excuse that, oh, this is what the family court does to men is just factually incorrect. That very, very few men lose custody of their children. When they do, there are very, very good reasons for it. And I think in this case we can see that a man who was capable of doing what he was doing was probably not a kind, loving and gentle father. There were domestic violence orders out against him. He had breached those. I think there was probably good reason to be concerned about him having access to his children, as he proved. Now, we don't know all the details yet, so more information does need to come out. But as far as understanding the sort of things that can lead to this, yes, I think there are questions there that we need to ask, but we need to ask it in the context of what can we do to help men who are in trouble, to help men who are losing control, to help men who are so overcome by rage that they become dangerous, and what can we do to protect those women? Not in the sense of what did she do or how was he driven to this. Nobody is driven to this, you choose it. And clearly he did. He didn't just turn up and just snap, because that's not what happened. He turned up with a can of petrol. So he didn't, this was not just a spur-of-the-moment thing. So there's a lot of things here that's going to come out through the coroner's inquest, a lot more information that needs to be covered here. But I think the most important point that, to be fair, has been reiterated by a lot of journalists and a lot of people commenting on this, it was not her fault. There was nothing she did that drove him to this. There was nothing she could have done that had any influence over this. This was his choice. And that is the fact that we need to focus on really clearly. And if we're going to examine the reasons for his choice, we need to do it in the context of he is responsible for this violence, not her.
Absolutely. Jane Gilmore, very sensitive topics. We're really glad you've come on and helped us discuss this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Now, viewers who are feeling distressed are reminded you can contact Lifeline. Their phone number is 131114, or you can visit lifeline.org.au. And for confidential information, counselling and support services about domestic violence, call the Domestic Violence Hotline. That's on 1800-RESPECT, 1800 737 732.